My name is Kristen Kolish. I am a retirement plan advisor at Raymond James, and I see from the registration list there's some familiar names there. I may have met you at a SHRM conference over the years or another event, summer clients as well. And I'm very excited to be speaking to you today. As I mentioned, the topic that we have is both timely and important. What's interesting about the topic is that similar to a lot of things that touch our 401k, 403b pension plans, is that you are not the singular person who has control over this risk, right? It's shared by others in your organization. It's shared by your vendors. So we have a very robust program today where I'm hopeful within the hour, you'll have an understanding of what are your responsibilities and what are some best practices to manage cybersecurity risks, because it seems almost impossible to read an article, open a paper, go to a social feed and not necessarily see something related to protecting our information. My team and I live and breathe this stuff when it comes to our employer-sponsored savings plans. We work with our retirement committees as well as our clients' employees to understand their risks and manage them. And that's a piece that may be surprising to you, but a component of this is actually educating your employees. Um, I am honored, as I mentioned, to share the screen with Jenny Kiffmeyer. She holds her JD with an emphasis in ERISA law, and she actually began on the record keeping side of the business, her career. So she knows firsthand some of the challenges that your vendors are facing. She also ran educational content for Plan Sponsor Institute, and currently she holds the role of Chief Operating Officer of Retirement Learning Center. If you haven't heard of RLC, they're a phenomenal resource. They provide outsourced ERISA consulting and thought leadership on all things related to retirement plans. Jenny regularly contributes articles to industry publications. She's always my go-to resource when it comes to timely topics. She serves on several advisory boards for educational certification. So I consider us all honored to have her on the agenda today. And on a personal note, Jenny and RLC have been great resources to me personally. I do look to them for additional insights, even just to bounce an idea off of. So I could not be happier to share the stage with Jenny. So with that, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
All right. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I am honored to be here today to speak with the group. And we are going to tackle a timely topic, cybersecurity and retirement plans. Can everyone see the screen all right? The slides?
Yep.
All
We can
right.
we can see it great. And Jenny and I were talking before that we were going to keep our video on for introductions, and we're going to take ourselves off the video so you can focus on the slides. Just some housekeeping items. If you have a question, feel free to throw it in the Q&A box and we'll address it throughout the course of the presentation. And then I know many of you are joining, of course, for the content, but also for the CE credits. So following this program, you can expect an email in your inbox with two things. One, very importantly, your SHRM CE code, but also a copy of the slides. So don't feel like you have to take vigorous notes. You will get a copy of these slides. So with that, take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Kristen. Again, cybersecurity and retirement plans. Our subtitle is Thwarting the Modern Day Willie Sutton. And if you are responsible for managing your retirement plan, I'm sure you have heard this topic coming up more and more frequently today in these days and times. So today we want to make sure to cover four primary sections. Number one, we want to provide the latest guidance on cybersecurity for qualified retirement plans. We're going to offer some tips for hiring plan service providers. Also some cybersecurity program best practices for retirement plans. And finally, Kristen in particular will be going through the role of the financial advisor with respect to cybersecurity. So For those of you who are old enough, you may know the name Willie Sutton. For those of you who are younger, let me just give you a little background here. So Willie Sutton was a gangster in the 1930s. His job, so to speak, was to rob banks. But he was not able to elude the law forever. He was arrested. And when he was being carted off to jail, one of the reporters, since he was such a famous gangster of the time, one of the reporters asked him, "Hey, why do you rob banks?" And Willie's response was, "Well, that's because that's where the money is." So and that is true today with respect to, cyber criminals today are targeting where the money is at. And if you think about it, one of the greatest repositories of money or dollars is in our retirement savings plans. In fact, as of the third quarter of 2023, was a total of $35.7 trillion in retirement plans. So it's no wonder cyber criminals are really focusing more on retirement plans. Just in general, some interesting statistics. The number of reported data breaches last year jumped 78% over the prior year. So that equates to about 3,200 reported data compromises that affected over 350 million individuals. It's becoming more and more common. If it hasn't happened to you, you know someone who has had this happen to them. And another reason why retirement plans are a target, aside from the money, is because they're pretty easy to crack into. The reason being the lack of specific cybersecurity protocol in many cases has left many retirement plans vulnerable. So, for good or bad, there are many potential areas of weakness for retirement plans because of the many players that are involved with maintaining retirement plan. There's sensitive participant information that gets transferred and collected by a variety of different providers, not only the plan sponsor, but also payroll providers, custodians, record keepers, TPAs, and of course, participants and beneficiaries are accessing these online portals and also are vulnerable. So when you think about it, any person or entity that can access the participant information could be a weak link.
Yeah, so what's interesting about this conversation, and to Jenny's point before, is that there's certain trends in the retirement industry that are even above the cybersecurity risk, one of which is industry consolidation. And I think that cybersecurity is one factor that's actually influencing this, because what we're seeing is that those that are in the business have to be committed to the business. Like there is a definite cost of entry and cost of maintenance from two perspectives. Of course, today, the cybersecurity protocols and insurance and all those that it requires resources and dollars and time, but also just bigger picture, the ability to offer better technology. So it's just becoming an industry that's requiring significant investment. So we're seeing this dichotomy between kind of the haves and the have-nots. And believe it or not, over the last 20 years, we've gone from having 400 record keepers in the defined contribution space to less than 100. I think that cybersecurity is one of a number of factors that's influencing that trend. So when we think about the threats of cybersecurity, what's at risk? Well, of course, the plan assets, right? We want to protect against the fact that someone who does not have ownership to the assets gets access to them. But also it's personally identifiable information, as the industry endearingly calls PII. So you may be thinking, I'm one person, right? What can I do? And what can my organization do? Well, it's the management of this risk that's important. We're never going to completely eliminate it. That's just impossible. And remembering that you're not buying a product that's going to solve all your cybersecurity threat problems. This is a process. It's an iterative process. And just like many other fiduciary responsibilities you have as it relates to a qualified plan, this is a process that you want to document, because as far as ERISA goes, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. So that's a trend that we're gonna revisit later in the conversation. And you may be thinking, okay, well, if there is a breach, what are my risks? What are the things bad that can happen to myself and my organization? And Jenny, if you could advance, there you go. So what's the potential downside? Well, the obvious downside is that your employees' assets may end up in the wrong person's hands, but that can result in fines. It can result in litigation. Identity theft protection. I'll tell you, personally speaking, Jenny and I were just talking about this. A prior employer of mine with a non-qualified plan had a breach, and I got a letter a few weeks ago that says my personal information may have been compromised, and offering identity theft protection monitoring service. So that's actually my stack of things to do this weekend, along with getting my taxes in order. So lots of fun to look forward to this weekend. But in addition to that, it's you don't have time for this, right? You have limited capacity as it is. I'm sure you wear many hats. The business interruption factor is really important, and understanding what, from a legal perspective, may be your risk. So one of the things that you're doing, and you can pat yourself on the back, is you're educating yourself. And if you could bring these best practices that Jenny's going to outline for us, and this is actually getting sourced by the Department of Labor. So this is the information you need to know. You bring it back to your committees and you document that you've had a conversation about cybersecurity risks. Better yet, you schedule a time with your providers to talk about what they've done to protect their plans and their clients and participants' assets. And you've really gone a long way in the aspects of this topic that you get to control.
Very well put. And that, in a nutshell, is why we're here today, to really help you know the best practices. So what are the best practices from the Department of Labor? We're going to cover the latest guidance. Interestingly enough, we don't have formal regulations related to cybersecurity. We're hoping that they'll be coming in the future. I know the DOL has contemplated them in the past, but right now there is no comprehensive federal cybersecurity protocol for us to follow. We do have a regulation. It's an older regulation that relates to the electronic delivery of notices and disclosures, which states that plan sponsors must ensure that the electronic system it uses to keep participants' information relating to their accounts and benefits, that system must keep that information confidential. So, that's all good, fine and dandy, but the regulation doesn't come right out and say it is a fiduciary responsibility. But we know that this is becoming more and more of an issue. Even though there is no federal level, many states have actually implemented cybersecurity laws for business owners. So that's something to be aware of as well. There's at least 40 states that have considered enacting their own cybersecurity laws. 24 have actually successfully put them in place. So important to check with the state laws too, with respect to cybersecurity. Cybersecurity issues really came to the forefront beginning in 2020 and really in 2021 as a result of a case, an actual lawsuit filed by a plan participant, Barnett, against Abbott Labs and actually the record-keeping partner that Abbott used. So in the case, this cybersecurity crook was able to get away with $245,000 from participant Barnett's retirement account. That the crook actually was able to obtain her social security number and access her email, which led then to the crook's ability to get into the participant's account. The participant alleged that the defendant, Abbott Labs, which was the plan sponsor, failed to enforce a security question and instead provided a one-time access code over the phone. So once the crook had her email address, was able to contact the administration department, and they issued a code over the phone that the crook was able to use, and voila, he was in the account. Well, the participant was ultimately able to recover about $108,000 of the funds, but she was not happy with that, and so filed a complaint against both the plan sponsor and the record keeper. In the end, the court found that the plan sponsor was not liable. There was just not enough evidence to support the fact that the plan sponsor failed in its duty. However, the court did call out the record keeper and indicated that the record keeper failed to protect Barnett's personal information and properly notify her of important changes to her account. So this case really took headlines, and since then has really put cybersecurity on the map. So after that case, that was in 2021, in February of 2021, the Government Accountability Office, the GOA, they often put out reports making recommendations to governmental agencies, and they put out a report to the Department of Labor on the topic of cybersecurity. What they recommended that the Department of Labor do was to formally state whether it is a fiduciary's responsibility to mitigate cybersecurity risks for defined contribution plans, and then to establish minimum expectations for addressing cybersecurity risks for plans. Now, despite this report and these recommendations, as I mentioned previously, the Department of Labor did not issue formal regulations. What they did issue, however, is what we call the trifecta of DOL guidance, or 3 points of light. These are really 3 separate directives or best practices for cybersecurity as they relate to retirement plans. And the 3 components are, number 1, there's tips for hiring a service provider. This piece helps plan sponsors and other fiduciaries within the plan prudently select service providers that have strong securities in place, and how to monitor those providers going forward. Number 2, the second piece was a cybersecurity best practices. This piece is for plan sponsors to give or to work with their record keepers and other providers on managing cybersecurity risks. There's actually a 12-step process that is suggested. And then the third one is for participants in particular. This is for online security tips and best practices for participants and beneficiaries on safe ways to check their accounts and manage their online access. So just to kind of keep you more involved with our discussion here today, we've got a test question here, or a little quiz. And the question is, as it relates to cybersecurity, the Department of Labor's current policy is A, has specific rules and regulations for plan sponsors to follow. B, does not require plan sponsors to have a formal process, or excuse me, policies and procedures. C, has guidelines for plan sponsors to follow its best practices. Or D, both B and C. Now we'll let you have a few moments to contemplate the answers before us. I always think I should have the Jeopardy do, 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 do.
I have that in my head now, Jenny. And actually, as our attendees are thinking through the answer, one of the things I did want to mention is that in addition to the slides, Retirement Learning Center was kind enough to put together for you all some checklists that you can take back. So I know we're going to be covering a lot of material. It may seem dense, but in 3 pages, you'll have a checklist for those 3 beacons of light that Jenny just described that we'll share after the program.
And our answer is both B and C. It does not require plan sponsors to have a formal process and procedures, and it has guidelines for best practices. Now, I don't want to leave this with you thinking, oh, I don't have to have a policy and procedures. You do. You should, because you are a good fiduciary. So.
And this should be dated, right? Because as of February 29th, our leap year day in 2024, that could certainly change.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. What Kristen said earlier about document, and putting this in your fiduciary file as an education session on this. Excellent. That goes a long way to demonstrate that you are, acting as a prudent fiduciary with respect to the plan. So let's move on to what the tips were that the Department of Labor provided for hiring a service provider. And again, this is a piece that plan sponsors use. It helps them select a service provider with strong cybersecurity practices, and it helps them understand how to best monitor them. This complements the Department of Labor's regulations on electronic records and disclosures, that one piece of regulation that we do have. It includes provisions on ensuring that the electronic record keeping systems have reasonable controls, adequate record management practices in place, and that electronic disclosure systems include measures calculated to protect that PII, or that personally identifiable information. So just going through some of the best practices for hiring a provider, keeping in mind this whole cybersecurity issue. Number one, you make sure you're documenting all of this, but what are the practices, policies, and procedures that a certain provider has, whether they're your current providers, or if you're out, looking to replace a particular provider, get documentation of what their practices, policies, and procedures are. And what types of security levels and standards do they have in place? Sometimes they might say, well, we'll give you our SOC 2 report, and that's good. But that report, which is an external, documentation of the protocols that a particular firm follows, it's a good report to validate that yes, they are, following certain procedures, accounting procedures in a secure manner. But it's not something that can cover all the expectations that the Department of Labor has for cybersecurity. So while a SOC report is good, don't rely just on that. Get more information can. For example, if you can get the provider to give you a list of any security incidents they've had, or any litigation they've been involved with, what were any of the legal proceedings that they may have been involved with. Also, what were those past security breaches? And how did they remedy those breaches? Insurance, that's a really important question, because, and this is interesting because as a plan sponsor myself at one point, I saw that more and more service providers were asking us, or excuse me, first our clients were asking us for whether or not we had cybersecurity insurance. And that started about 3 years ago. And so that is something we added to Retirement Learning Center's list of insurance policies, was a specific one on cybersecurity. So it's important also to ask other service providers of your plan, do they have cybersecurity insurance in particular? Because sometimes a general insurance policy for a provider does not cover cybersecurity incidences. And we want to make sure that there is a particular rider or, in fact, a policy dedicated just to cybersecurity, and get a copy of that to for documentation in your files.
Jenny, am I hearing you say correctly that the SOC 2 is like a minimum? You'd want to see that, but you want to understand kind of how your service providers have managed these risks like in practice, right? So
Uh,
like
yeah. Oh,
give us some real-time examples of, because I am confident in saying that all the major service providers have had some incidences in some way, shape, or form, right? So understanding what they were, and in my experience, maybe more importantly, is what their reaction was to it. You know, how quickly should you expect to be notified? What kind of communication should your employees expect? And at the end of the day, if there's a bill to cover, whose lap is that going to fall?
absolutely, yes. And so to your point, yes, the SOC 2 is a good documentation to have for the file. But yes, I think more importantly is, what are they doing on a day-to-day basis? And I can give you a personal experience too with the Retirement Learning Centers plan. Our IT provider, we outsourced our IT, they had a breach. We didn't find out about the breach till probably a week into the issue, and we started noticing some data was disappearing, and we had to actually contact them to get information. And then it was like pulling teeth to get what was going on. And finally they came out and basically fessed up to what was going on, and gave us a course of action. But to know about what is your notification process, if should something happen, what would be your provider's next step to make sure that the plan is kept up to date, what needs to be done to protect further information from being lost. Get it all in writing, document, document, document. Because if it's not documented, should you come under investigation from the Department of Labor, it would be as if it never happened if you don't have it documented. So, it's in your best interest to have all of this in the fiduciary file for the plan. And another important thing is, I can barely spell IT. And I'm sure that's the case for a lot of individuals out there. And the cybersecurity protocols and procedures and all the various acronyms that go along with them are mind-boggling. So it really is important to pull in someone who is well-versed in that area, even if it's someone you have to hire for, to bring in to talk about the protocols, and at least translate the information for you, so that you are making an informed decision. Remember, you're going to be held to a prudent expert standard, meaning you have to have someone come in and be that prudent expert, so that you can understand and make the appropriate decisions with respect to the plan. Now, the Department of Labor right now will not go in and target a plan specifically for cybersecurity breaches. However, they have started to look at plans that are already under investigation. And since they're already looking at the plan, they've begun starting to ask for a rather extensive list of documentation regarding cybersecurity practices for the plans. We were able to get a list from a friendly plan sponsor that was under an investigation, and then got this list from their examiner on what they were expected to provide. So, for example, the examiner was looking for documents on all the policies, procedures, and guidelines related to data governance, classification, disposal of data, implementation of controls, not only for the plan sponsor, but also for all the service providers related to the plan. They were looking for, business continuity, plans. For example, what's your disaster recovery plan? Both for the plan sponsor and for some of the service providers. What are the data privacy protocols that they have in place? Do they do cybersecurity training, and what does that consist of? All documents and communications relating to cybersecurity incidents in the past, something we were just talking about. What's been going on in the past and how was that remedied? All the security control audit reports and documents and communications describing any security reviews, if whether a provider has had an outside third party come in and do a review. So it actually, on the list, there were 10 items that the Department of Labor requested. And further, the examiner said, well, if you cannot produce all these requested documents, you have to give a reason why you can't. So it's really not that, you can't say, well, I just don't have them. It's like, well, you have to try to get them. And then if you can't, what's the reason that you can't get them?
Jenny, I think that's so interesting about the DOL not necessarily targeting it for now. I do see a question here from an attendee about plan audits. Is this something that you would expect? So if you have more than 100 participants in a plan, you're subject to an annual plan audit that you conduct privately, and that's attached to your 5,500. But is that something that you're seeing getting added to a plan auditor's checklist?
That is a really good question. I know there are a lot of times they'll do the more about, it used to be called the limited scope audit, which means that you're only looking at the financials and making sure all of those are in order. But I know there is some clauses in there that relate to, providing notices, and again, that pulling in that electronic delivery and making sure participant PII is confidential. So in a roundabout way, that is being pulled into the audits. And I really do see this as, not only for the 5,500 annual audit, that could be another checkbox for the future, but also, the Department of Labor actually in the future starting to target plans specifically for cybersecurity breaches. We're not there quite yet, but I do see that on the radar.
Thank you.
So what are some of the practical things that a plan sponsor can do? Number one, ensure the safe and secure transport of employee deferrals. That's another area the DOL is acutely attuned to, is that making sure that those employee salary deferrals get deposited on a timely basis. And so all the, the go-between between the payroll provider and the record keeper. So send a letter to the payroll provider requesting their processes and procedures related to the transmission of deferrals, and also the security protocols that are in place. Document the record keeper's processes, request in writing from the record keeper, what are those policies and procedures? Ensure that participants have adequate information to mitigate any potential breaches. So this goes along with, there's that third piece that the DOL provided on tips for plan participants and beneficiaries. But also you could do, as a plan sponsor, you could do cybersecurity checks. Right now with RLC on a monthly basis, I think we have little videos that we have to watch related to cybersecurity best practices. Also, our own IT department has taken on the, testing of employees by sending out some bogus emails here and there to tempt you to click on something. You watch your cybersecurity video and it says not to click on anything that doesn't, look like a legitimate link, or, if it looks like the email address is strange, don't click on it. So our IT will send out little emails on occasion to see if they can catch anyone with that. So just those kinds of things to keep participants on their toes, and hopefully, preventing any terrible breach of their information. Quiz time. So for our next question, plan sponsors should request documentation from the following service providers regarding their policies, procedures, and recommendation for cybersecurity breaches. Is it A, the payroll provider? So should they be asking it from the payroll provider? Is it B, the record keeper? C, their plan advisor? or D, all of the above? And here we'll give just a couple of moments here to contemplate that, and knowing again, all those entities are involved with the upkeep of the plan, the safest bet is to request it from all of them. Moving on, now we'll talk about the best practices for record keepers and other plan service providers. This is the second piece that the Department of Labor put out. And it has 12 steps that is recommended for the record keeper or other service providers to go through to make sure that they are upholding their end of the bargain on keeping plan information and participant and beneficiary personal information confidential. So those 12 steps in a nutshell. Number one is to have a formal, well-documented cybersecurity program in place. Two is to, conduct annual assessments. Three is to have a reliable third-party audit of all the security systems. Four would be to clearly define the roles of your security personnel and who should be contacted if there is a breach. What are the steps? Something happens. Who do I call first? What do they do next? 5 is have strong access control procedures in place. This is, the idea of having either a 2-step or a 3-step authentication process in place, or another means of controlling who can have access. For example, on our plan, my retirement plan, I control who has access to the records and can make changes in the plan information and such. So only certain individuals can have access, those kind of controls. Number 6, ensure that any assets or data stored in the cloud that from another third-party service provider, what is the security protocol with those entities? 7, conduct periodic cybersecurity awareness training among the employees, as well as, for the plan sponsor, again, going back to the participants taking part in these ongoing cybersecurity awareness trainings. Implement and manage what's called a Secure System Development Lifecycle, or an SDLC program. Remember, I mentioned all these fancy acronyms that go along with IT speak and cybersecurity. That's one of them. That's one where I would certainly call in someone to translate that for me, to know exactly what I'm looking for and need to have documented in my file. Number 9, have an effective business resiliency program in place. That means, what happens if a disaster hits? Who do you call? Where where is business going to be operating from if that happens? So that disaster recovery program is important to know. Number 10, encryption. That's something, some providers don't offer encryption, others do. Right now, we are in the middle of moving from a provider that does not encrypt our data to one that will encrypt our data, and that's highly important to all of our clients, as it is in your area as well. It's very important to encrypt that sensitive data. Number 11, implement strong technical controls in advance and in accordance with the security practices. So not only have these practices, but also make sure they're being followed, implemented, and followed. And finally, appropriately respond to any of those past security breaches, and what and how did they handle those breaches in the past. One more time, get it all in writing. Document, document, document. All right, we'll have one more quiz, I believe. This time, it's a true and false question. Plan sponsors should require written policies and all insurance contracts from their service providers regarding cybersecurity. And the answer is true. Very important to know what you're dealing with. Harken back to when we were talking about the case of Barnett versus Abbott. Barnett, the participant, not only, filed the suit against the plan sponsor, but they filed the suit against the record keeper as well. So we're looking for what kind of protections and insurance coverage your providers would have as well. Finally, let's look at online security tips. This is the third component, or the third point of light from the Department of Labor on cybersecurity best practices. This one is a piece is for plan participants, and it offers participants and their beneficiaries tips on the safest ways to check their accounts and to keep their personal information secure. Some of these are going to be pretty obvious and things you've heard about before. Others may be, news and good information to provide. So this would really be a good piece to make part of any kind of employee financial wellness program, any education that you might have with respect to cybersecurity and keeping personal information secure. I thought it was interesting statistic here to throw in. There was an IBM study done, I think in 2022, that revealed 95% of cybersecurity breaches are due to human error in handling one's own data. So remember when I mentioned, there's all these different links in the chain of who is involved with the retirement plan and processing and all of that. The weakest link could be, and based on this statistic, would be the plan participants and beneficiaries. So it's really important to spend time, I think, educating plan participants in keeping their information secure.
Yeah, and Jenny, one thing that I'm just thinking to myself is we're all participants, right? So that would include us.
Absolutely. Yes.
I think so many times as plan sponsors, we're thinking we're wearing our plan sponsor hat and not our participant hat. But think about this section personally for you all as well.
Yeah, that's right. I will relay on one of my coworkers. I got an email from him that said, "Oh, I can't remember my login information. Could you go in and reset this for me?" And I looked at the email address. Well, the first thing that tipped me off is it said, thanks, Andy. And I thought, well, number one, Andy rarely signs his emails to me because, we just go back and forth all day long. So he usually doesn't take the time to sign them. And I thought, so that was a tip off. And then I looked at the email address and it was some strange, email address. So I knew that was a bogus email. So, it's going to be, you got to be on the lookout everywhere. So back to these are the tips that the Department of Labor recommends. Number one is to register and set up routinely monitor your online account. I've heard of a lot of participants that maybe go in one time, set up their account, and then maybe go in once or twice a year. That's probably not a good practice. It's if you're going to set up an online account, it's best to, that you're going to commit to monitoring it and making sure that you're, checking it regularly. Also use strong, unique passwords. Don't reuse your passwords. There's a lot of, ways that you can control your passwords, because I know it's such a headache to try to keep track of all these, numerous passwords that you've got for a variety of different logins. There are apps that can help you monitor and keep track of those. Sometimes, there's just some easy, mnemonic systems that you can, come up with in your own, mind for a pattern that you use consistently, like a number and a word and then numbers again, so that it's not the same kind of, not your birthday or something like that, but something that's unique to you. Use multi-factor authentication. We talked about that. One step, two step. One step is gone by the wayside. It's at least two step, if not three step authentication now. I think oftentimes I'll get, I'll try to log in. I'll get a check to send an email will come back, you have to enter this code, so that then you have to go to your phone, get the code, then enter the code. And I know it takes a lot of steps, but it's well worth it if it protects your valuable retirement savings. Keep personal contact information current. It's important to go in, update your beneficiary, update your, emergency contact information. That's, to make sure that if there is something that goes wrong and they, for whatever reason, the plan cannot get a hold of you in particular, they can get a hold of your emergency contact and they can help find you as quickly as possible. So to shut down that any access as soon as possible. Close or delete any unused accounts. That's a really good thing to do in order to avoid, something that you've probably forgotten about and it's just sitting out there. It might be ripe for the pickings. My husband the other day got an email regarding his Marriott rewards points, and thank you for transferring them to Lucy or whatever, whoever the name was. And it's like, I haven't checked that account for years and I didn't authorize that transfer. So again, check unused accounts, make sure you can close those out if you don't need them. Be wary of any free Wi-Fi. Amazing what can happen, on the free Wi-Fi, when they say it's, others can see what's going on, what you're doing and access information easily. It is true. And some companies have even taken the step of, if you're using a company computer, that you cannot be on free Wi-Fi, that it has to be a secure Wi-Fi. Beware of phishing attacks. And again, I mentioned a couple of those emails I've gotten that look, on first glance look legit, but be sure to check out, especially if it comes from a strange looking email address or something that's looking for your PII, your personal information in any way, shape, or form. Just be very leery of clicking on those and going any deeper into those. Use antivirus software and keep your apps and software current. And finally, know how to report the identity theft and any security breach that you might be involved with. Moving on to this role, and this, I'm so glad Kristen's on the call today because she is really, I would say she and her firm have written the book on how financial advisors can be of assistance and really be the go-to for help with cybersecurity protocol. And so at this point, I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And I would start this section by reminding you that you don't have to go it alone, right? Department of Labor encourages you to partner with prudent experts. Now, I'm not representing that I am a cybersecurity expert. I am certainly not. What my team and I have gotten pretty good at is managing the process of kind of overseeing this risk. And it starts first and foremost with understanding what does a strong governance structure look like for our clients, and what is their fiduciary governance structure, where cybersecurity is one of a few bullets that fall under that category. So oftentimes financial advisors, and I would say honestly, even historically, the role of the advisor has been to evaluate investments, right? And what's interesting to me is that the investments, as I think about the grand scheme of all of the roles that we play, and granted, I hold my CFA designation, I enjoy interviewing managers. That's kind of how I've been brought up in the industry. It's important, but that seems to be something that's very manageable. There's all these other things that kind of surround the investment selection that your retirement committee needs support on, and you should be turning to your retirement plan consultant or advisor to help with that. Your best opportunity to vet all of these items is through your vendor due diligence process. Now, when I host fiduciary training for our clients, one of the things I remind them is that ERISA, for one, I think this is an interesting point, but it's 2024. It's actually the 50th anniversary of the passing of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA. It was passed in 1974. And that legislation is is the cornerstone of qualified retirement plans, it also happens to be completely agnostic to employer size. Right. So I can appreciate the frustrations of you all who may wear many hats, and saying, how can the rules for a Fortune 500 company be the same as the rules for, let's say, someone who's got 10, 15, 20 employees? And the reality is that they are. Um, so this vendor due diligence process is important. Usually we're talking about vendor due diligence through the prism of knowing what you're paying for your plan and understanding if those fees are reasonable versus the industry, reasonable versus the value of the services that you're getting from your providers. You don't have to be the low cost option. You don't have to go with the lowest cost option if you're getting value for that cost. But an important additional benefit of vendor due diligence is that it's a great time to ask all of these questions. So yes, I would say every few years, maybe it used to be 3 to 5. I feel like it's more 3 now. And it could be through a very formal RFP process where you're hiring an independent consultant to run, or depending on your employer size, it's partnering with your current advisor to run to get some proposals and ask these questions. But during the vendor due diligence process, asking what are your cybersecurity policies and procedures. I'm going to share this checklist in a moment, but it's a great outline for those conversations that should be had hand in hand with your advisor and with your vendor. What dedicated cybersecurity resources are out there? Like the great thing about this DOL guidance is that if you're a record keeper, you have to be doing this, like, right? So the question becomes, okay, if you're providing some basic level of coverage, what else are you doing for me as an employer? What else are you doing for my employees? What is your investment that you're making on a regular basis into cybersecurity practices? And this is something that Jenny and I both mentioned during the last, 50 some odd minutes, is the practical application. When you have a breach, how are you addressing that? I think something that's so important, and Jenny, if you could go to the next slide, is the education of your employees. So if you are working with an advisor who provides participant education, this is something that should be certainly covered. Whether it's through a bonus additional program or a bullet during your annual education, is understanding that it is important to own your online presence. A fact that I was surprised to learn a few years ago, and I think there's less and less people like this, but I actually have an uncle-in-law who refuses to transact online, just not comfortable. And what I was surprised to learn is he's actually putting himself even more at risk. You need to own your username, because if you don't have a username to a particular financial account with a few pieces of PII, date of birth, social security number, name, someone who is not supposed to have access to the account may in fact be able to create a user ID. And that's worst case scenario, because then they could really institute a requested distribution. So there's some little tidbits here that may be surprising, but are important. I laugh at the dual factor authentication. I roll my eyes too. Every time I go to log into my 401k, I'm like, no, I do it on this computer all the time. I laugh because my Apple Watch has been helpful, because it'll pop up my secure ID, my code that I could put in. But all of that is important, and just having awareness of the risks that are out there. It's not so dissimilar, quite frankly, than what we may experience in credit cards. Like, how many of us have looked at a credit card statement and said, that's charges at mine? Well, the credit card companies have started protecting against this just because they've had more incidences earlier on, sooner than the retirement industry. So if you call your credit card company and say that there was a charge that wasn't valid, they'll give you an immediate credit and then go investigate. Well, I just in the last 2 months went through a vendor due diligence process for a client, an RFP process, and one of the providers said that's their new policy for participants who meet certain criteria. They sign up for dual factor authentication. They make sure that they answer security questions. If they do all the things that are within their control, and if there's a breach and there's a distribution that's unauthorized, that provider is going to stand by them and give them an immediate credit. And then behind the scenes, because they're committed to the industry, work out how to get that, how to retrieve the monies that were lost fraudulently. So these are nuances. I've seen also, if you move to dual authentication, there's an additional cybersecurity guarantee. So whether you're completely happy with your vendor and just want to stay, or there's other aspects that you want to vet, having these conversations are important. I've seen some instances where vendors, they'll add a guarantee if asked, but that's not their standard protocol. And that's an important point. And I know we're coming up on time, but if you've been with your record keeper for quite some time, it's important to have a conversation. And I encourage, even beyond cybersecurity risk, having a conversation. I'd say, once a year, once every 2 years, where you're going through your plan document, you're going through your plan operations and asking two very important questions. One is, why are you winning business today? And then also a complement to that is, what services am I not currently taking advantage of that you can provide us that I should be? And that's the nature of relationships that are longstanding, right? So if you've been with a provider for 10 years, you have to think there's been improvements in 10 years. And yes, of course, I'm sure they bring them to your attention, but maybe not everything. So you want to know what's the latest and greatest with your provider, especially as it relates to cybersecurity. So Jenny, if you want to go to the next slide, and understanding the contract piece of this. Now, again, I'm also not an attorney, but it's important to make sure that your documentation when engaging with the vendor includes all of the protocols and the expectations that you have of them. Maybe that's your general counsel reviewing the contracts. It could be even appropriate to bring in a risk counsel, depending on plan size or circumstances, but making sure that your contracts specify what cybersecurity guarantees are available to you. And if your contract was signed 10 years ago, that's a great question to ask your provider. What addendum, what additional language could we document that covers me for some of these risks? Because again, we're not going to be able to erase them. We're trying to mitigate them.
Perfect.
So one last
great,
quiz.
yeah. I think we'll skip the quiz. We'll go, because we're almost up on time here. So we'll go to our takeaways for today. First off, the Department of Labor does require sponsors to keep plan participant and beneficiary information confidential. So to that end, however, there is no federal overall retirement regulation for cybersecurity. We do have these great 3 pieces from the DOL on cybersecurity for the plan sponsor, the participants, and then also for service providers. Please reach out to other experts, reach out to your financial advisors to help, secure the plan as best, and follow through on procedures and protocols so you can protect those valuable retirement plan assets.
Feel free, I've included here my email address. You can expect an email from me this afternoon with that CE information, the presentation, and the checklist. I'm just going to email it. We don't have time to share it now, but it's a great follow-up for you. And yeah, I would encourage you to reach out if you have any questions. As it relates to your retirement plan, cybersecurity, or otherwise, consider us a resource. And I just want to thank you and congratulate you for taking an hour out of your day to learn more about a topic that's very important. So thank you. And thank you, Jenny, of course, for your insightful comments and really for making us all smarter today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.